Today, we're honored to welcome Kim Perlak, an innovative guitarist whose work bridges classical, jazz, and American traditions. As chair of the guitar department at Berklee College of Music, Kim has shaped modern guitar education while leading impactful projects like the Veterans Guitar Project and co-authoring Classical Technique for the Modern Guitarist. Her performances blend jazz improvisation with classical technique, and she has collaborated with top musicians across genres, with a career spanning public radio features, cutting-edge curriculum development, and dynamic live performances. Kim continues to inspire musicians worldwide. Let's dive into her journey. So, Kim, good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Great to see you too, and thanks for having me here.
Oh no, my pleasure. I'm a fellow Berklee alum. I've got to imagine that when you have that position of being the chair of, Berklee is guitar central for people who want to go study this music. So when you have that position, I would imagine like you must wake up every day and it's got to be like, wow, this is such a special thing and there's so much responsibility for it. It's such a privileged position. Do you think about that a lot?
I do. I really think of it. I think the only way I can think of it is that I'm a steward of it, a steward of this huge legacy, this beautiful department, and everyone's connection to it. There's a global community. There's thousands of guitar players who've been through here and thought of Berklee Guitar as their home. And I really am respectful of the power of that in people's lives. And then also what we're bringing into the world, because everyone who comes through here ends up with their individual voice and then also is a part of this history. And then over time, over all the decades that there's been a guitar department since 1965, founded in 1962, but then a real formal department in 65, like that's a lot of lives and a lot of notes and a lot of musical innovations. And what I hope feels like a positive community moving forward for people.
And I always like to think about it when talking about music school, it's how do I put it? Jazz and classical are the teachers for all the other styles. So when you're a musician as yourself who carries, it's like almost like, the yin and yang with those things, I think it's almost like the perfect fit. Did you ever think about that those two styles as being the teachers of, classical and jazz? Like if you do these two genres, then you can pretty much go wherever you like.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think because classical music and jazz on the guitar, they are the genres that really were represented in the academic oral tradition.
Right.
If you think of a school is really a place where oral traditions can gather and where people can devote concentrated time to learning in a way that can be systematic to a certain extent so that it helps you build a foundation without a lot of gaps. I think in our country and in most countries probably around the world, I'm speaking from my experience and I know it to be true for others, there's also a roots music and a folk music and a popular music tradition that for players like me, that was our first guitar experience. And so it's just as strong of a tradition and there's so much to learn from it. And I think because we live in a multi-stylistic world, you can't help but be influenced by all of the styles. And so I think being at Berklee and part of being a steward of this community is to say like we respect all styles equally.
You were teaching at Berklee prior to being the chair. Also I think you were the assistant chair. Am I mistaken?
I was the assistant chair, but I came to Berklee as assistant chair.
Got it. There's a chance you might have taught my friend. I don't know. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I apologize. His name was Dane Farley. I'm not sure if that name.
I don't think I had Dane personally.
Okay. Well, he admired what you then you did.
Fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. I came here as assistant chair. I was living in Austin, Texas. I had finished my doctorate there and I was teaching at 3 different schools and I was running 2 nonprofits that were guitar related, one for veterans, American military veterans, and one for high school students. And then I found a real home here at Berklee. I'm from Western Massachusetts. So my teacher, when I was 12, used to take us here to Boston. And at that time, the buildings were really open. You didn't need to get an ID to get in. And she would just have us walk down the hallway in the 150 building, 150 Mass Ave, just to see all the people practicing. And she would say, and it was just guitar after guitar after guitar after guitar in tiny rooms. This was in the 80s. And she would say, you know, this is what it takes. If you say you want to do this, look at how these people, one after the other, they're just practicing. You hear the metronomes going.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Who'd you say took you to Berklee? Who would take you to go?
My teacher, I had this
Oh, your teacher. Okay.
fantastic teacher when I was in junior high and high school named Suzanne Higgins. And she just thought, you know, come in here, even if you're falling in love with classical music or you love American roots music, you really should develop a jazz affinity, you know. And she knew a lot of musicians from her life as a performer and in many different facets. And so she found a way to get us into the regatta bar as kids.
That's awesome.
And we had a special place to sit right near the bar. And then we could talk to the musicians, and she would bring us to the Beacon Theater in New York City. She would bring us all over the place. There was one night where I was a kid.
Like field trips.
And, yeah, and I ended up sitting at a table in the China Club with Pat Metheny drinking Cokes, talking about the modes.
That's a trip.
Yeah, and I'll never forget that conversation. It was so amazing. He was so kind to me and just an amazing person. And so I think it was wonderful because she really had this idea that all music is valuable. You can learn something from every style, and that musicians are people. And if you want to be part of this community, you should get to know people. And I think that has helped me a lot in my life in many ways.
You know, I you know, at one point, and I had a neck surgery, so I had to start playing nylon string while I was healing. Like, so I needed to play on a light guitar, and it reminded me of like learning classical guitar when I was younger. It was such a beautiful thing to go back to that after like over, you know, almost 20 years. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to incorporate the nylon string into jazz. There was very few and far between. I mean, and what do you think it is that it's just, you know, jazz musicians, quote unquote, they don't want to bring the nylon string into the music? Is it just because of the masters who play jazz? Is it because it's just like we just automatically think like, what do you think there's something to it, I think.
Okay, so I think in some ways this is related to your other question about like fundamental foundational curriculum. And I think there's so much in the jazz language of what you choose to play. Your scales, your modes, your arpeggios, dyadic intervals, all kinds of harmonies, right? On the fretboard, the way that jazz musicians can map the fretboard and understand it and see it is such an incredible tool for everyone. And I think the Berklee curriculum has always honored that. With classical musicians, so much of the heart of it on the guitar is your technique, your facility, your tone colors, like total control over your sound and playing in a way that really honors the physicality of your body so that you're not being injured, so that you can play with all the facility that you want. And then also your ability to read and just feel like you can write notation, write music. So I think what we've tried to do as we keep evolving the Berklee curriculum is bring more and more of those two things into the core while also honoring like rhythmic sensibilities and all kinds of phrasing and just the nuances of form and harmony that come out of the roots traditions and popular traditions. And so I think that being a classical guitarist that is in the jazz world in the sense that a lot of my colleagues are there, my music crosses over now. I think that when you focus so much on what you're playing on the fretboard, there's a reality of time where you're not as much thinking as a classical musician of how you're playing it.
That's true.
Right. The other thing is true for classical musicians. You know, we know how we play a note. We could play a note in 100 different ways. Then if you say, I need you to play this thing on the guitar in 100, in like 100 different ways, like we could play the thing in different ways, but now if I have to play 100 things, that could overwhelm me. And so there's a balance there. And so one of the great collaborations is to say like, okay, what can electric guitarists learn about tone production and facility from a right hand perspective from a classical guitarist, and maybe some structures, just things about reading and things about like formal structure. And then what can people who come to the guitar from a classical background or an acoustic guitar background in general learn about the fretboard, and I think those are the things. I think they're just so big,
The
right? Like you know what I'm saying? It's such a big language. And I think like when you play a nylon string guitar, if you don't have a technique that really works, it can, first of all, your tone can sound really clicky and not very satisfying. And it can also feel cumbersome. And so I think it's a different kind of technical facility that you get when you kind of have things that come from that classical tree or the roots of the classical tree in guitar.
do you see the work you've done as far as, writing books almost like continuing something of the Segovia scale approach in a sense, because that's very, centered around these, specific techniques and, shifting. Like, I mean, was that something in your thought? I mean, I could be totally wrong, but this is just something I thought about.
So I come from teachers who studied with Segovia, right? So that's where I am in the classical tree in America. And you're right, the Segovia scales that are really famous, he made those fingerings on purpose so that the shifts would be in such an awkward way to a certain extent that you would have to really practice.
I know my teacher drove me crazy.
Right? And so, or you're going to hear it. Oh, the leading tone doesn't sound right because there's a shift there on the third string, the way you move your hand. So now smooth that out and really work on it. I think one of the things that sometimes would be the other side of that coin is that classical guitarists tend to really memorize those fingerings and then feel a little lost as to what they're playing, because the ascension of the scale is different than the descent, right? Because they're working on just the chops part and the tone part. And so what I think has been great for me is to come here where things are organized on the fretboard so that you can see the world of the fretboard underneath your hand. And you play 2 octave scales first, starting on each note of the scale, your modal pattern, 7 patterns coming across, right? And then thinking about tone production that way, while also thinking about what are your scale degrees? What are your note names? And then connecting your own, like you're now creating your own quote unquote Segovia scales, because now once you have the patterns that come across the strings from 6 to 1, now you can start to think, how would I ascend the fretboard? Right? And so then for musicians who are already comfortable doing that, because they've learned from the jazz tradition or the Berklee tradition of doing that type of work, now I can say, okay, when you're doing that, think about these basic things in your technique. If you want to play with your fingers, or even if you're just listening to your tone colors with your pick, when you change strings, do you change timbre? Do you want to?
It sounds to me like you're just you're just trying to acclimate everybody in the sense, like it's a very inclusive approach. Like no matter what the style is if you're like, you're just trying to, but it's all coming from that place. Like I'm trying to acclimate you so you can be free to do what you want, because this is not easy on any level. I think anyone who says it's easy is lying.
I think that's right. I mean, I think one thing I said off the cuff one time that I've carried with me is you have to go deep to be free. You can't get around it. You have to go deep to be free. In some ways, there's only fundamentals, in the sense that you're going to keep building and building and gathering information, and you keep coming back to your core of your technique, your tone, how you feel about your knowledge of the fretboard, how you feel about the authenticities of the styles that you choose, and how that feeds into who you are and your personal authenticity. And so it becomes this like responsibility of listening. And in order to make this music work, what do I need to work on?
That's fantastic. I also want to talk to you about working with Francisco Mela because I've been kind of keeping up with some of the stuff online because whenever I hear about, the guitar drum duo can almost sound, and when a lot of people try to do it, it almost sounds, I don't want to, I hate to use the word hollow, no pun intended, but the overall sound, but the way you two play together in some of these things that I've been checking out, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that relationship, developing, working, the material, working with him? I'd love to hear more. I'm sure the listeners would too.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I want to say that it probably is one of the most organic and joyful musical partnerships I've ever had in my life, and I'm so grateful for it every day.
He's special.
He's a special person and a musician I really admire. And we met here at Berklee because he worked with our faculty on a number of concerts that we were putting together. Most notably, he and I connected because we were doing a tribute to Mick Goodrick, the end of Mick's life. And we had all of these alumni involved, and Mela became our drummer for that concert. And it was such a meaningful time for Mick himself and for everyone who was coming to be with him. I think most people, for the last time, they were able to do that. And we needed a special person who could honor everyone who was coming and their playing and also honor the moment. And he was obviously the person. And so we had that connection. And then we just would continue to run into each other. And one day he came in here and he said, "We have to play. And I want to play your music." And I thought, okay. And he was so positive and his energy was so great that before I thought about it, I said, okay, I have a concert at the Berklee Performance Center. It's on my birthday. Let's see what we could put together. And we had a session. And in that first, I don't even think we spoke before we started playing. And I had these pieces that I loved that I thought were kind of modern and impressionistic and colorful. And everything I knew about his approach to the drum set was all about texture and space and color and creating form through improvisation, like spontaneous composition. And I thought, I have these pieces that, to me, I wrote them in the pandemic when I was living in a really natural, beautiful setting with mist coming off the lake and all kinds of images in my mind. And I thought, what if I just sit down and close my eyes and start to play that musical imagery that I wrote, and then just allow the form of the piece, even though it was written, just kind of not be stuck to like kind of a beginning, middle, and end, and just let him have his time. Mm-hmm. And after about, I don't know, maybe 12 minutes or something of playing, we stopped and he said, "Let me ask you a question. Is all the music like this?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, this is perfect." And he said, "Do you need me to do anything?" I said, "I just need you to be yourself." And we just kept playing. And at the end of that first day, he said, "I think we need to make a record." And again, it just sounded right to me. So I called Randy Roos, who is a dear friend of ours and a really good colleague here in the guitar department, mm-hmm. who's a Latin Grammy winning producer and engineer. And we booked a date. And so by October, we were in the studio, and it was, the record that we made that'll come out this spring is a one day. And it was really funny because we hadn't even spent that much time together. You pick someone up, you drive 2 hours, you get your sound, you eat lunch, and then we just went in and we played the whole record almost like a concert. We took breaks, in between every 3 pieces, but we didn't go back. We just kept going.
As far as takes go, were there it was only a few of each, or
we just did one.
Just one.
Yeah. We just did one. Yeah. And it was, I'm telling you, it was this, it's very, it was just, I think the thing about it is that it's not just that we somehow were able to find space in the music for each other, but we really were able to find space for each other.
Yeah, I have to be honest. As soon as I hear that instrumentation, someone's going to do that. I just the automatic. You know what I mean?
You're afraid.
Yeah, I'm like if someone tells me "Oh, do you want to go see this concert?" and they just say that's what it is, I'm going to be like, odds are no. But are you guys going to do a lot of concerts in the future? Is there plans for this at all?
Yeah, we'd like to. We have a plan to play in May here in Boston at the Lily Pad on May 4th.
Oh, nice.
And then we'll do a performance kind of clinic in August in the Performance Center during our summer program. And then, yeah, and then we'll release the record on this beautiful label from Interlochen, Michigan called Sacred Black Records is going to put it out. And then we'll go from there. It was such a spontaneous thing. And I think it's really beautiful.
So you're open to doing more dates, more concerts, like, all over kind of, or is
100%. I would be. I hope he is.
yeah.
I think what's fun to me about it is I guess that's right. You wouldn't think like a nylon string guitar, but I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking I want to make music with this person.
Yeah.
I was thinking about making music with my friend who's a deep musician who I thought something special could happen. And I think those are the things, like if you think too hard about what it is, sometimes you miss what it does.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that we're always in that, it's kind of like go deep to be free, play 100 things 100 different ways, what music is and what music does. We're always living in the connections between these dualities in our lives. Right. And I think, but that's where the special things are in the middle.
Was that aside from playing with a drummer like that and that context, did you do other things with different instruments as a duo, like, prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, my duo project that I've had for the last 10 years, maybe about 11 years now, is with David Tronzo, who's a
right. Guitar, yeah.
Supervisor.
Yeah.
And that was similar in the sense when I came to Berklee as assistant chair, I was a non-jazz musician in one of the chair positions as assistant chair. And I had also lived a shorter amount of time than some of the faculty had taught at Berklee. And so I thought, the best way to get to know people is to sort of ask them to show me something that I find interesting. And I found everybody fascinating. And when I connected with David Tronzo, who was a professor at the time, he said, "Oh, I really love the way you approach tone production." And I said, I've always wanted to improvise and write music. And so we started a lesson swap. And the first time we performed, it was very similar to your reaction to my duo with Mela, where David and I were playing in a concert, and he said, "We're going to play a piece today that we're writing for our duo." And someone in the audience just said, "Really?"
Yeah.
And I thought, that's great, because now we can explore these possibilities. And very similarly, we didn't want to say like, okay, we're classical and avant-garde or classical and something else that comes out. We're putting them on top of each other. We wanted to really, push each other a little bit out of our comfort zones. And I think, honestly, I've loved all my musical experience in my life. I'm most interested now, especially as a chair of this department, in things that stretch me and create something beautiful and unexpected that also shows that example to the students. Because, you are a Berklee guitar player. You were here as a student. Now you're an alum. And the thing is that there's so many different expressions of art and music in the department, in every student and every faculty member and every alum. So to set a good example, what do you want to do? And what I want to do is show people, like, you can leave your comfort zone at any time. Mm-hmm. You can take a risk and you can find people that you connect with. And when you take those risks and you also sort of lean back on all of your experience and bring that to the music, then you could create something really special and unexpected. And I hope that everyone feels comfortable doing that in their own way.
How much?
So I feel like that's part of my job.
How much?
No, I just wanted to say. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I just wanted to say I feel like that's part of my role.
Sure.
As the department to do that. Yeah.
How much do you see? Larry Bayonne was the chair, prior to that. So when you are, taking that positions and starting that job, how much of it do you see as, putting your own personal spin on it, your own ideas, and also taking what was there like previously? It's got to be a little bit difficult to navigate that because of the history, but then, you want to put your own spin on things as well. Like, what percent would you say was it in your bringing forward from the older one?
I hope that I'm bringing all of it forward.
Oh,
I
okay.
feel like, I mean, and then because I think as a steward, right, it's more about supporting the collective and then seeing where we think we should be. And
Okay.
I think Larry Bayonne was here as assistant chair and chair together for 40 years, right? And I learned a ton from him. I had 5 years with him every day. We were like inseparable every day. And he really gave me this gift of really mentoring me, right? As an assistant chair and then really into the chair role. And we still talk and I think he's brilliant because I took on from Larry what I see as this legacy of finding out like what are we doing beautifully and let's keep doing that. And then what are things that we could be doing differently and who can we bring in that would honor that?
Sure. Well, also with him too, because I feel that, I mean, I'm sure you're not all in music schools all over the world, or certain musicians, they kind of like they plateau. Not that they're still great players, they plateau, but I feel like he's someone who was always getting better, from the investigation that I did, even towards the end of before leaving Berklee, like the way he was playing, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think that he practiced that and I obviously learned that from him in my own way. So I'm doing it in my own way, but that's the idea, that's the spirit of it,
Hmm.
right? And you honor the people who are with you. And then anytime you can do things better and differently in a positive way, you do it.
Sure.
And with an honor of this is really what worked for a number of years. And now what are we looking at? Like the goal of the department is always to say, like, what is a common vocabulary and a common experience that hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different guitarists can have together that will also prepare them to go out and be an individual. So it's a daunting idea. And it also takes a collective. Like you have to build a community to do that. And
Mhm.
one of the most moving things I know about Larry is that he would often, as the department began to expand in style, find people who didn't finish the formal degree at Berklee. And he would find them and he would say, would you consider teaching in the department and giving students what we couldn't give to you at that time?
Right.
And that to me is like the most like confident and humble thing I've ever heard. It takes incredible courage. And so I think about that a lot. Like, how can I embody that attitude while also saying like, yes, we really have strengths that I want to make sure to honor.
No, this is a great way to end on that note, on that positivity. Kim, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure to speak to you and very enjoyable on my end. So thank you so much for doing it.
You're so welcome. It was great to be with you.